How do you envision businesses transforming their core operations, their strategies, deploying their capital to prioritize decarbonization, and what challenges or opportunities do you guys feel we have there?
My name is Christian. I'm co-founder and CEO of Rensair. We do decarbonization solutions of HVAC systems in commercial real estate. Work a lot with offices, healthcare sector, and really our focus is much more, or the perspective I can offer is much more from a micro perspective. So what's happening in the individual asset? How do we convert or essentially bring specific assets closer to net zero? Which is obviously quite different from Mike's perspective. Hopefully that will be interesting. But to answer the question, I would start the exact same place as you. If you're a business, you have a shareholder responsibility to generate a return. If you're a pension fund, you need to have pay pensioners over time. So it needs to be good business to invest. So you can talk a lot about moral responsibilities, but at the end of the day, we also need to acknowledge how the world is structured. And therefore, I think it's on technology companies like ourselves to develop solutions that are attractive. And obviously that's not easy, but if we look over the past 10 years, obviously there's been a huge move towards making technology more affordable and improving ROIs. And we see that a lot also with how our business has evolved. Again, we work a lot with the healthcare sector. We sell air quality management solutions to them. In healthcare, there's a very clear need for good ventilation for infection prevention reasons. But obviously in a corporate environment, whether you're talking about air quality or whether you're talking about carbon emissions, there needs to be a proper ROI. And that's where we've seen sort of a big transition, but also we had to adopt our business model to suit that and give people the chance to achieve an ROI, and luckily we've been able to find a model that enables that. But that is really what drives interest from people. It is being able to say what is the exact business case of making this investment, and then I think as a real estate operator or owner, your job is to then evaluate what gives me the best bang for my buck. How can I make the best possible return, or find the initiatives for that specific asset that can remove as much carbon as possible for the least possible investment.
Decarbonization, in order to know that we're decarbonizing, we also need to have data about what is happening, both baseline data and also operationally, to be able to track, measure, and to see, are we moving in the right direction, and have the measures or the investments in technologies actually, are they having the impact that you hope? So how are businesses now utilizing data analytics, AI, other digital tools to both measure and accelerate their carbon reduction measures? Maybe Christian, you have something to start us off with there.
Yeah, sure. I don't think anyone can dispute that statement. We need to be able to measure where we start, and therefore quantify the impact of changes we are making. But one of the things, again, we see on the individual building level is just getting more data for the sake of getting data is not helping anyone. There are a lot of facility managers and sort of engineers working on sites and buildings that are bombarded with data and are giving a lot of insights around their buildings, but have a lot of, well, then what questions? Yeah. Because just being able to measure and say, oh yeah, your building is performing poorly and this measured, doesn't really necessarily give you an answer. And often it tells you what you kind of already know. We see it with air quality data, for instance. If you're near a busy road, air quality data is most likely not, as good. Or, frankly, just being here in central London, air quality data is not as good as if you're countryside Dorset, right? So that's where I think it's important, also from a technology standpoint, that we start focusing on solutions that are not just adding more data points, but also can be part of the solution. There are more and more sort of auto-affecting assets. That's something we've also developed as part of our technology, where we essentially say, okay, we need to have a system that could both generate data, but also automatically respond. So you define how should we respond in a certain situation, and then it simply just does the reporting to the building managers. Because, again, just adding data points for the sake of data points is not necessarily efficient.
No, I mean, I heard the point made by on another panel at another event. We were discussing this topic specifically, and the point was being made that actually there are cases where we have too much data, and to the point where it's not helpful, and we're not gaining any insights from it. It's just an absolute avalanche of data being collected by multiple types of sensors and monitors, and if you can't make any actionable decisions based on that data, then it's not really helping us at all. Which emerging technologies do you believe hold the most promise for driving widespread decarbonization? And more importantly, how can they be deployed at scale? Otherwise, we're not really moving the needle. So maybe Christian, you want to start off there?
Sure. In terms of technologies, I think, again, coming at it from sort of our perspective, what people need. Obviously, we talked a lot about AI at a conference like this, and it's an obvious one, but also going back to the question around data and how do we actually enable people in buildings. A lot of the people that are actually working in these facilities and have to use these systems day to day are not skilled and don't have the sort of the necessary educational sort of skill set to be able to handle AI tools. They don't necessarily have to, but there are definitely challenges around that as well, but undoubtedly that's one of the key factors. And then of course it's more like on the energy side. There are two parts to the equation of reaching net zero, possibly more, but there's definitely the operational efficiencies of how do you really make a building use as little energy as possible, and then there will always be some energy use, and that residual we need to replace with greener sources, right? But on the operational side where we operate, HVAC is the big one to tackle, because in a typical commercial building, HVAC accounts for 40 to 60% of energy consumption. And when you then move into the very energy inefficient assets, which there are a lot of here in a country like the UK, due to poor insulation, due to a lot of government buildings, NHS hospitals that are operating hugely inefficiently, well, there it really becomes a big focus on saying how can you especially heat facilities during winters in a way where they conserve heat and reduce heat loss. And there's some interesting technologies coming out there, but I think that's really where you can move the needle in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to find the low-hanging fruit, where we can prioritize making an investment and getting a real reduction in energy consumption. But like if we look at the UK building stock, for example, there's a lot of buildings with historical significance. How are you going to make the actual body of that building more energy efficient? It's probably really hard. So what you're saying is that the operational efficiencies is maybe the one to go after first?
I definitely think so. And like as an example, we're working with a prominent NHS hospital right now. They have a heat loss of 90% because they're opening windows throughout the winter for infection prevention reasons. They don't have a mechanical ventilation system, so that's their only option, right? So you can talk a lot about grade A buildings and sort of crown jewel assets of how you can optimize the marginal benefits with AI. But if we look at it from sort of a broad country standpoint, there are a lot of buildings out there that need some fairly heavy lifting, but again, that can also be needle moving. So perhaps it makes more sense to look at the bottom 50% of the market rather than the top 10%, right?
Yeah. You had some interesting business cases we discussed earlier, where sort of the microeconomics of installing an HVAC system in a retrofit scenario with a building that was clearly not being run efficiently. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that made a lot of economic sense to me.
Glad it did. Yeah, one of the big challenges with HVAC is generally making the investments that actually drive sustainability and lower energy consumption in buildings is often very capex intensive. And you therefore have payback cycles that are 10, 20 years. And that's not necessarily attractive when you're trying to generate an investor return, right? So one of the things we did with our sort of business model was really change that to a SaaS model. So we sell HVAC solutions and come in with sort of a standalone solution that can be implemented quickly and on a fully variable pay. So people can hand it back at the end of a contract if they don't want it more. But that enables essentially that the energy consumption that we save in the building, that net gain will more than offset the cost of installing the solution in the first place, allowing real estate owners or building operators to have a building within their existing operating budget significantly reduce carbon emissions and therefore essentially the profile of that building. And that's something we're seeing a lot of interest for, because if we look just to the 2030 deadline we have here in the UK and Europe for EPC ratings, for instance, there's a lot of retrofit action that needs to take place. There's a huge amount of CapEx that's required if that's going to be done through conventional methods. And that's why we think there's a necessity for essentially evolving the business models and allowing for operators to do it in a more capital efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the case of HVAC, when there's a technology, you can actually place it inside an existing building, hook it up to existing ducting, and go. I mean, I don't see any downsides.
No, and I think also a key point is extending then the useful life of the system that's there, because there's obviously also the issue of embedded carbon in the system. Just ripping out and replacing with a brand new HVAC system is also not good for the environment in many ways, right? So if you are really looking at it holistically, and doing your carbon accounting properly whenever that's possible, and corporates can really account for that, well, that's where you really get to, then you need to evaluate how do we make our systems and our buildings last as long as possible, rather than just rip out and replace with new, because that doesn't really work in the long run.
Yeah.